Our journey to the secrets, peaks, and declines of vanished civilizations begins with the question of what the Earth was like. The surface of our planet consists of 6 continents. But what existed 4 to 5 million years ago? There was an enormous continent that included Australia, part of Asia, and southern Africa. In 1850, English zoologist Philip Sclater proposed naming this continent Lemuria after the strange creatures called lemurs that inhabited it. In a brief essay titled Mammals of Madagascar, Slater wrote, "The anomalies of the mammal fauna of Madagascar can best be explained by supposing that anterior to the existence of Africa in its present shape, a large continent occupied parts of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. This hypothetical landmass, he suggests, stretched out towards what is now America to the west, and to India and its islands on the east." Slater outlined a geological scenario in which fragments of the original landmass integrated into modern continents. This continent was broken up into islands, of which some have become amalgamated with the present continent of Africa, and some possibly with what is now Asia. And that in Madagascar and the Mascarene Islands we have existing relics of this great continent, he asserts, identifying these locations as remnants of the lost land. I should propose the name Lemuria, Slater concludes. In the mid-19th century, natural scientists tried to explain why certain plant species appeared so similar in regions separated by vast bodies of water. There is a hypothesis that a massive landmass, now submerged under water, once connected these regions. Another scientist, William T. Blanford, wrote, "Paleontology, physical geography, and observations of the distribution of fungi and fauna point to an ancient connection between Africa, India, and the oceanic archipelagos. This primeval landmass, known as Lemuria," he continues, "must have existed during the early periods of the Earth, until the end of the Miocene epoch." Blanford concluded, "Africa and the Indian Peninsula are remnants of this continent." In esoteric sources about the origins of humanity, extraordinary information is provided. For example, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, speaks about the stages of the human race. Referring to ancient sources preserved in inaccessible caves, the great traveler and researcher offers descriptions of subtle forms of intelligent matter and the Lemurians. Blavatsky wrote that the Lemurians were the root race of humanity. Theosophist Vicente Hao Chin Jr. notes, in 1904, W. Scott Elliott published a book entitled The Lost Lemuria. It contained maps and descriptions of the continent based on the works of H.P. Blavatsky and an unnamed clairvoyant, who is most certainly Charles W. Leadbeater. He explains, highlighting the sources of Scott Elliott's material. It also provided clairvoyant descriptions of human beings at that time, Chin continues. These beings were said to be 12 to 15 feet high, with dark skin, long lower jaw, flattened face, small but piercing eyes that are far apart, and which could see sideways. Chin adds that these beings were described as having an eye at the back of the head, further emphasizing the extraordinary and otherworldly traits ascribed to the inhabitants of Lemuria. The philosopher Rudolph Steiner asserted that such historical preservation in the universe, the Akashic records, also identifies the Lemurians as precursors to humans. Rudolph Steiner, in The Lemurian Race, Cosmic Forces, writes, "What was cultivated there was not really a religion, it was divine wisdom and art. Man felt that what was given to him, there was a direct gift from the spiritual universal forces." He continues, "When he received this gift, he considered himself a servant of these universal forces." Portraying their sense of spiritual purity and alignment with cosmic forces, Steiner notes, he felt himself sanctified from everything unspiritual. Persons who had such powers were regarded by others with great awe and veneration. Legends of sunken continents were known to all cultures of the Pacific Basin. Hawaiian priests claimed that vast land masses once connected their islands to New Zealand. Geographical studies have confirmed that several islands in the Pacific Ocean did indeed submerge during ancient epochs. There is some surprising evidence of an advanced civilization that predates the migratory Polynesians. Patti Kealahalani Wright, founder of Nga Puakea o Koalaupoko, notes, We know that Polynesians in historical times had only a rudimentary ability to shape stone. They had no known ability to cut stone in the sense that we would cut bread with a knife. Yet we find quite a few stones cut flat, notched, or precisely fitted throughout the Pacific. This raises the questions of who did the work and where they got this extraordinary technology, she adds, pointing to the mystery surrounding the origins of these advanced techniques. When asked, "Are there examples of this cutting in Hawaii?" Wright responds, "The Menehune Ditch on Kauai is a wall beside the main road. Most of it is buried under the roadway. Of the small amount that shows, look at how nicely the stones are cut and fitted. No known Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders had the technology to do this," she states. So the presence of this construction ability points to an earlier civilization. Wright identifies these earlier builders as the Menehune, but questions their origins. The earlier people in Hawaii are generally dubbed the Menehune. But the real question is where they originated and where they got this stone-cutting technology. Are you saying that the Menehune were more advanced than the historical Pacific peoples? Yes, it seems that way, Wright answers. The Menehune Ditch exists. The Tonga Arch and Tonga Pyramid exist. The amazing ruins of Nan Madol in Pohnpei exist, she explains. All involve cutting, lifting and fitting stones using unknown technologies, Wright continues. These unknown technologies match or exceed our current abilities. In 1914, German geologist Alfred Wegener proposed the theory of primeval landmasses. According to this theory, a single continent on Earth once existed, called Pangaea. In his book Continents in Collision, Russell Miller writes, "Like many scientists before him, Wegener briefly wondered whether the continents could have been a single landmass at one time. Eventually, he had dismissed it as unworthy of further consideration and instead considered the possibility of land bridges. However, having one day noted the apparent fit between the Atlantic coastlines of Africa and South America, it now occurred to him," Miller writes, "that the evidence he was seeing, far from proving the existence of land bridges, seemed to confirm instead his fleeting intuition that the continents had once been united and had since drifted apart." As Wegener himself later wrote, "A conviction of the fundamental soundness of the idea took root in my mind. This pivotal realization marked the beginning of Wegener's groundbreaking theory of continental drift, which transformed the field of geology." Wegener later formulated a plausible hypothesis. During the Paleozoic era, Pangaea split into two parts, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. These two giant landmasses gradually broke apart into smaller sections. Laurasia formed North America, the Atlantic and Europe, while Gondwana became the continent of Mu. South America, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, India, and Lemuria. Most of the modern continents were underwater at that time, and now unknown continents and large islands, Lemuria in the Indian Ocean, Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, and Mu in the Pacific, became fertile grounds for emerging life. As is known, Earth's continents are always on the move, continuously drifting together before breaking apart in a never-ending cycle. In the future, the outlines of Earth's surface may change significantly. In 1870, Polish researcher Augustin de Zarzemski reported that a Tibetan monk showed him ancient tablets mentioning the continent of Mu. This continent received its strange name, Mu, from the Maya peoples of Central America, who lived on the Yucatan Peninsula. 120 years ago, Robert Stell was prospecting with two other Americans when they encountered Mayas in southern Mexico. Stella writes, "Eventually, I came across one old Maya priest who took an interest in me and seemed willing to share ancient knowledge. Asking that I not discuss what he learned with any local Mexicans," Stell continues, "the old man told me there had once been a great civilization in the now jungle-covered land. By using stones to represent 1000s or 1000, Stell notes, he conveyed the time as 46,000 years since the first Mayas, then called Muyans, had come to their country as a great army from the motherland of Lemuria." This account suggests a profound connection between Mayan traditions and the broader legend of Lemuria. It is said that 50 million years ago, the first humans appeared on Mu, although anthropologists cannot determine the exact time of humanity's origin on Earth. According to ancient sources, Mu was an ideal state from which all human civilizations descended. Wendell Stevens writes, "Most sources claim Lemurians were living in an idyllic paradise, largely agrarian with lush forests and an abundance of flowers and fruit trees." Stevens describes a utopian vision of Lemurian society, emphasizing its harmonious relationship with nature. Stevens portrays Lemuria as a peaceful civilization, guided by collaborative and nurturing values. He notes, feminine principles of sharing, cooperation, and creativity produced a society virtually free of crime, strife, and warfare. Lemurians were vegetarians and lived in harmony with nature and other creatures. Their lifestyle was deeply integrated with the natural world, he notes. They had highly developed psychic and telepathic senses, which were applied in practical endeavors such as horticulture, Stevens adds, suggesting that Lemurians utilized advanced mental abilities in their daily lives. People believed in mind over matter and were adept at manifestation and other reality-creating techniques. This tradition survives, some claim, in the Polynesian concept of mana and various fire-walking ceremonies throughout the region. Stevens writes, linking Lemurian beliefs to Polynesian cultural practices that persist today. Even traditional anthropologists are puzzled by a pre-Polynesian culture that stretched across most of the Pacific, Stevens concludes. The French researcher Brasseur de Bourbourg discovered ancient documents, such as the Troano manuscript, which described the story of Mu. It was found on the Yucatan Peninsula and contains Mayan accounts of the catastrophic events that befell Mu. One such account reads, "In the 6th year of Khan, on the 11th day of Muluk, during the month of Zak, terrible earthquakes began, which continued without interruption until the 13th day of Chuen. The land of Mu, the land of the Coms, was sacrificed. After 2 successive eruptions, the land was engulfed by water, and in a single night it disappeared. Violent upheavals of the earth caused the continent to sink beneath the waves, along with its 64 million inhabitants, 8,060 years before the writing of this book. This manuscript is now preserved in the British Museum in London. Another manuscript, known as the Codex Cortesianus, is stored in the National Museum of Madrid. It mentions Mu several times. By their divine power, the Coms caused the earth to tremble repeatedly at sunset, and during the night, Mu, the land of the Coms, sank. Mu, the land of life, was submerged by the Coms in a single night. These accounts of the destruction of Mu are supported not only by written records of the Maya, but also by ancient inscriptions found in Indian monasteries. Friedrich Wilhelm, a renowned archaeologist, found a Lhasa manuscript in an ancient Buddhist temple in Tibet, which states, "When the star Baal fell, to where there is now only sky and ocean, 7 cities with golden gates and transparent temples were shaken and destroyed as if struck by a great storm. A stream of fire and smoke rose from the royal palaces. The people sought refuge in their temples and citadels, and the sacred wise men of Mu turned to the heavens, saying, 'Did we not foresee all this?' But the wise men, both men and women, blinded by the lightning and flames, cried out, 'Mu, save us.' And Mu replied, 'You shall all perish, along with your servants and your wealth, and new nations will rise from your ashes. If they learn that man is not the one who takes, but the one who gives, they will avoid the same fate.' The continent and its people were torn apart, leaving nothing but ruins." English researcher Augustus Le Plongeon, who dedicated many years to studying Mu, wrote, "This continent was a vast, flourishing land, stretching from the Hawaiian Islands in the north to the southern regions of the Pacific, including the islands of Pasqua and Fiji. The dimensions of Mu were more than 5,000 miles from east to west, 7,620 kilometers, and over 3,000 miles from north to south, 4,572 kilometers. Its vast plains were crisscrossed by rivers and streams. Dense vegetation covered the land, while fragrant flowers and aromatic herbs grew on trees and shrubs. During this time, 64 million people lived on the continent, divided into 10 tribes or nations, each distinct from the others, but all united under a common government. Le Plongeon's poetic account of Mu is based on tablets found on the islands of Pascua, the Lhasa manuscript, the Troano manuscript of the Maya, the Indian book Vedas, and ancient Egyptian texts. British explorers have documented this information. Le Plongeon added, on some islands in the southern seas, such as Pascua, Mangaya, Tongatapu, Ponape, and the Mariana Islands, ancient stone temples and ruins remain, hinting at the era of Mu. On the Yucatan Peninsula stands a half-destroyed temple with inscriptions referring to the lands to the west from where we came. The impressive Mexican pyramid in the southwest of Mexico was erected as a memorial to the lands to the west. One deciphered text describes the catastrophe. The waters rose evenly, covering the lowlands. Where there were once plains, jagged shores appeared. The earth trembled, and the waters swallowed everything that lived and moved. The mountains collapsed, and the land of Mu disappeared beneath the waves. Le Plongeon believed that the influence of Mu extended not only to oceanic nations such as Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii, but also to Greece. He argued that the ancient Greek alphabet originated from the Mayan language and has been preserved through generations. According to him, detailed descriptions of Mu's geography were recorded in ancient documents by the Maya. Modern research, however, suggests that the origins of the first humans may have been different, and humanity, as we know it, is the heir to the cultural, religious, and economic achievements of the Lemurians, the people of Mu, and the Atlanteans. In 1959, archaeologist Richard Harlan discovered documents in Mexico allegedly left by Mu's sacred priests. However, investigations, including those of Le Plongeon, indicate that the history of Mu is surrounded by many strange and inexplicable mysteries. Scientists were skeptical about the possibility that a continent could have existed in the Pacific Ocean and then disappeared without a trace. However, some discoveries shed light on this mystery. First, sacred tablets were found in an Indian temple. These tablets became the first evidence of Mu's existence and served as the starting point for searches for other evidence worldwide. The tablets describe the descent of people from a land at the center of the Pacific Ocean. They also recount the creation of humanity and its journey on Earth. Further written evidence, recorded in Egypt, India, and among the Maya, recounts the destruction of Mu by earthquakes and its subsequent engulfment in fiery abysses. The land sank beneath the waters of the Pacific Ocean, and where once stood a mighty civilization, now only ocean waves remain. Confirmations of Mu's existence can be found in other ancient texts, including classical works such as the Ramayana, recorded by the sage and historian Valmiki under the guidance of Narada, the supreme priest of the temple of Adityabha, who dictated ancient texts preserved in the temple. In one part of the Ramayana, Mu is mentioned as a land that arose in the west from the place of its origin in the east, meaning from the Pacific Ocean. In the already mentioned Troano manuscript, the same symbol for the land of Mu is used, which has been studied in Maya, Egyptian, and Indian contexts. Another source, the Codex Cortesianus, a Mayan book of roughly the same age as the Troano manuscript, further strengthens the narrative's authenticity. There are also the Lhasa manuscripts and hundreds of other documents from Egypt, Greece, Central America, Mexico, and the oral traditions of indigenous peoples in remote regions of the United States. There are remnants of cultural structures, with architecture and decorative symbols that speak of the disappearance of the continent of Mu, the cradle of humanity. There are similarities between ancient symbols and legends found in Egypt, India, the Middle East, Babylon, China, and islands of the southern seas, as well as in Central and South America, and among the myths and legends of North American tribes and other centers of ancient civilizations. These symbols and legends are so similar that they must have originated from a common source, Mu. Let us try to imagine this continent stretching from Hawaii to the islands of Easter and Fiji. This vast land was shielded from cold winds blowing from Antarctica by high mountains, which remain visible as the peaks of the Pacific Ocean islands to this day. These islands, Fiji, Tonga, Nicobar, Samoa, Mangareva, Tahiti, The Marquesas and Easter Island are remnants of Mu. At the continent's center were flat plains covered with tropical vegetation. To the north, the land was bordered by mountain ranges, remnants of which are the Marquesas and Hawaii. The continent consisted of three landmasses separated by narrow straits or seas. Adjacent to the mountains were dense tropical forests. Numerous wide and calm rivers and streams crisscrossed the land. Along the ocean shore and riverbanks stood dense mangroves. Sacred lakes dotted the landscape, and wide paved roads lined with massive stones spanned the land. This was a beautiful and tropical land with endless plains. Rolling meadows and gently sloping hills were covered in lush vegetation. The land was not marred by abrupt elevations or jagged mountains. The terrain was smooth, with no significant mountain masses yet formed. Travelers traversing this lush and fertile land passed through forests of fragrant flowers. Along the shores of rivers and lakes, giant fern trees rose, providing a mystical ambiance. The waters sparkled with the light of countless phosphorescent organisms, resembling gems reflecting the colors of emeralds and rubies. The inhabitants of Mu were described as 64 million people of different tribes or nations, divided into 10 groups that submitted to a single government. Throughout the land, wide level roads extended like rays of light. These roads were paved with massive stones fitted so tightly that not even grass could grow between them. This land was called the Empire of the Sun. The continent had one unified religion, and all its people believed in the immortality of the soul. Their reverence for the divine was so profound that they never spoke the deity's name, but referred to it only through sacred symbols. The supreme priest, Ra-Mu, was the embodiment of divinity, though everyone understood that Ra-Mu was merely a representation of the supreme creator. The Lhasa manuscripts, discovered by Friedrich Wilhelm in Tibet, note that in this land, the wealthy adorned themselves with delicate ornaments and exquisitely crafted jewelry. During this epoch, the people of Mu were highly civilized and advanced. In addition to the white race, there were people with yellow, brown, and black skin, although their numbers were relatively small. The ancient cities of Mu were magnificent metropolises, and their ships traveled the world, from the western to the eastern oceans, from the northern to the southern seas. They were skilled architects who constructed massive stone temples and palaces. They erected grand monuments, monoliths. In all three regions of Mu, the cities were built in large urban centers, villages, and rural areas. There were 7 principal cities, which served as centers of religion, science, and education. Mu was the cradle and center of human civilization, education, and trade. All other regions of the earth were its colonies. The cities of Mu housed enormous stone temples carved from rock. Without roofs, these were known as transparent temples. The roofs were absent to allow the rays of Ra, the symbolic representation of divinity, to penetrate the temples and illuminate the heads of those praying and bowing in worship. The wealthy lived in luxurious palaces surrounded by numerous servants. Ships from Mu continuously transported passengers and goods between the mainland and the colonies. When this great land reached the peak of its development, becoming the center of all Earth's civilization, science, and trade, and when massive stone temples were erected and gigantic monolithic statues were established, catastrophic events suddenly began. The southern regions of Mu were shaken by thunderous underground explosions, followed by earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Along the southern coast of the continent, massive catastrophic waves covered the land, and many magnificent cities were destroyed. The volcanoes erupted with fire, smoke, and lava. Because the country was flat, the lava did not spread over the land, but accumulated at the sites of eruptions, forming cones that eventually became volcanic mountains, some of which can still be seen on certain southern islands. Over time, volcanic activity ceased. After the cessation of the eruptions, the people of Mu gradually overcame their fear. The destroyed cities were rebuilt and trade resumed. Generations passed, and when the past faded into history, Mu once again fell victim to earthquakes. The entire continent began to sink and sway as if on ocean waves. The land cracked and trembled like leaves in a storm. Temples and palaces, monuments and statues collapsed. The cities turned into piles of ruins. The earth heaved and sank, shook and trembled, and fire burst from it, producing clouds of smoke and tongues of flame. These flames combined with streaks of lightning that filled the skies. A dense shroud of black smoke covered the land. Gigantic waves washed over the shores and flooded the plains. Everything rushed toward inevitable destruction. When the horizon showed the setting sun, it appeared like a fiery sphere, red and raging. After it sank below the horizon, impenetrable darkness enveloped the surroundings, broken only by flashes of lightning. During the night, the entire land broke into fragments. The doomed continent plunged into the ocean with a thunderous roar. When Mu sank into the fiery abyss, fountains of water surged from all sides, meeting at the former heart of the continent and churning violently in that place. The grandeur of humanity, with all its magnificent cities, temples, palaces, arts, sciences, and knowledge, became a legend. For almost 13,000 years, the memory of this great civilization haunted the earth. When the continent disappeared with all its inhabitants, the waters calmed, spreading evenly in all directions to form the Pacific Ocean. The remaining islands and archipelagos were submerged, leaving only a few survivors. These people discovered that they had lost everything. They had no tools, no clothing, no food, only small plots of land surrounded by the ocean. The only available clothing for them could have been animal skins, if animals survived on the islands, and rough vegetation. Tools and weapons had to be fashioned from stones, bones, and shells. However, the primary concern remained food. Many people undoubtedly died from cold and hunger, and when they died, their bodies became food for the survivors. The survivors of a highly advanced civilization descended to a primitive state and remained at that level for many epochs. One can easily imagine the despair and horror that these advanced beings felt at their plight, and it is possible that many died without participating in such barbarity. However, over time, across many centuries, and with changing generations, the unfortunate islanders descended further and further until their ancient traditions, initially based on religion and passed down from generation to generation, became rudimentary and eventually forgotten. The great past was erased from their memory, much like the treacherous waters of the Pacific Ocean had swept away the continent that gave them life. For a time, some remnants of Mu preserved the vestiges of their civilization, but without support, they gradually fell into decay and were lost, and on their ruins arose new civilizations. The civilization of the Empire of the Sun could not have completely vanished without a trace. Ancient ruins, statues, monoliths, stone temples, and tablets, such as the Lhasa manuscripts and manuscript codices, have preserved the memory of this great civilization and its tragic fate. The ancient historian Plutarch described an encounter between Solon, the Greek legislator, and a high priest of Egypt named Sonchis. Sonchis recounted that 9,000 years prior, Egyptians maintained trade and cultural exchange with lands to the west until those lands disappeared beneath the waves of the ocean. It was from the continent of Mu that the Egyptians derived the name of their god of the sun, Ra. On the island of Ponape, part of the Caroline Islands, ruins of one of Mu's temples have been preserved. Engraved on its steps are sacred symbols of the motherland. Local tribes approach this site with reverence, afraid of disturbing what they believe to be the spirits of the ancient inhabitants of Mu. The Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl dedicated years to studying the massive statues on Easter Island. He concluded that they were erected by the people of Mu to protect this piece of land from the encroaching ocean. The island also holds tablets known as Rongorongo, which contain much valuable information about life on the continent of Mu. The Polynesians are believed to be descendants of the people of Mu. They live on the southern island of Fiji and maintain the simplest way of life. However, other Polynesian tribes also consider themselves descendants of Mu and are convinced that they're medicine men, healers who perform operations without tools, use knowledge passed down from the ancient Muans. Legends of the Polynesian peoples testify that only 7,000 islands remain from the once vast territory of Mu. Thus, the cradle of humanity was not in the ancient East, as claimed by biblical teachings, nor in Eastern Africa, as suggested by modern science. Instead, it lay on the now vanished continent in the Pacific Ocean. According to some scholars and esotericists, evidence of Mu's existence in the Pacific Ocean can be found in the mysterious structures of Easter Island and megalithic constructions on other oceanic islands and seabeds. For example, above the Pacific island of Ponape, part of the Caroline Archipelago, lie 92 artificial islets made of basalt columns filled with coral debris. This island city, known as Nan Madol, was built thousands of years ago but has never been fully explained. The basalt blocks, weighing up to 15 tons, were shaped and transported over distances of 10 to 15 kilometers, a feat impossible for Stone Age people. However, legends tell of giants who once inhabited these lands, constructing these fortresses in the middle of the ocean, and of the ultimate demise of a highly developed civilization and its godlike people. From 1926 to 1931, James Churchward published his findings in his book, The Lost Continent of Mu. The materials for this work were based on Indian tablets and an extensive collection, more than 2,500 examples, of stone tablets discovered in Mexico. Both series of tablets share a common origin, as they bear inscriptions of the sacred writing of Mu. The most fascinating testimonies about Mu were inscribed on tablets found on Easter Island. When this island was created and became known to our ancestors, the land was crossed by beautiful roads paved with flat stones. These stones were so tightly fitted together that not a single sharp edge was visible. Along these roads grew large trees, whose canopies intertwined above travelers' heads, forming a continuous roof. It was said that the roads, built by the great Zeke, extended in all directions from this central point. Traces of these roads remain not only on Easter Island, but also on other islands. On the Marquesas Islands and islands of Gilbert, tall basalt columns adorned with ancient ornaments have been found. On a burial mound discovered on a small island called Arore, the seal of a princess of the Empire of Mu was stamped, accompanied by the royal crest of the sun. Churchward's narrative fascinated many, leading them to wonder how such extraordinary information had been preserved. It is worth noting that the life story of this remarkable man could itself serve as the plot of a compelling novel. While working in India, the researcher befriended an old Hindu priest who helped him decipher stone inscriptions that had been preserved for centuries in a remote temple sanctuary. The ancient texts told the story of a forgotten civilization that arose, flourished, and vanished in the waves of the Pacific Ocean long before the similar fate of Atlantis. Inspired by the evidence of this civilization, Churchward devoted the rest of his life to the subject. His journey took him from Burma to Arizona, the South Seas to Africa, Australia, and Mexico. He studied the history of the Maya and the Aztecs, geology and ancient religions, symbolism of Greek letters, and the swastika. He compiled an alternative history of our world, a thrilling masterpiece that many people came to believe. What do you think? Was there really a massive lost continent in the Pacific Ocean? As always, thanks for watching. Back soon with another classic.